you ready?
Hello and welcome into our Charter Road Hospitality Studios here at the Town Place Suites in Oxford. This is Toddy Hotline. I'm your host, Brian Stubbs, and we've got a great show planned for all of you guys this week. Big news with a big injury coming from Ole Miss spring football practice. I'll tell you who got injured and what the severity of it is. Plus, Ole Miss baseball, they are getting into the middle of SEC play. Over the weekend, they took on the Mississippi State Bulldogs in Starkville. So we'll talk about that series with the Daily Mississippian's Brian Scott Rippee. And Brian Scott will tell us how the Rebels fared and what's coming ahead for the Rebel baseball team. Also, we got Ole Miss softball. They are in action. They played Mississippi State over the weekend as well. So we'll give you an update on them. And then other sports are going on. Ole Miss tennis, Ole Miss women's and men's golf is going on. And also this coming Saturday, they're going to say who will wear the number 38, as they'll have the Chuck E. Mullins Award Ceremony. That's Saturday at the Grill at 1810. I'll give you guys a couple candidates who could be up for that prestigious Ole Miss football honor. So again, packed show. We're going to talk Ole Miss baseball to lead things off, as Brian Scott Rippee will join us on the other side of Hotty Toddy Hotline. Stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Because you want more flavor, at Nuke's we marinate and grill to perfection. Because you want the latest culinary tastes and trends, we never rest. At Nuke's, great food drives us. So we are meticulous in our preparation, obsessed with the quality of our ingredients, and uncompromising about serving you our very best. We believe that sharing a memorable meal is one of life's ultimate pleasures. Join us at Nuke's Eatery.
All right, welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. I'm Brian Stubbs. Now we are joined on the phone by the assistant sports editor at the Daily Mississippian, Brian Scott Rippee. Brian, what's up, man?
Not much. How are you?
Doing well. You know, we've been trying to have you back on the show to talk Ole Miss baseball. And Brian Scott, the last time we talked to you, Ole Miss was doing amazing in the non-conference. Had just come off a big victory over Louisville, and then we talked to you right before conference play. But the team 21-7, 3-6 in conference play. So let's get to the weekend series over Mississippi State. Honestly, I had no idea that MSU was even on paper that good this year. I see that coming into the series weekend, they were the 5th team in the country. That kind of surprised me. But let's kind of take this game by game. What we saw the first game, just a close ball game between the Rebels and the Bulldogs. We saw Ole Miss, again, only got one run. It came in the first inning, but then in the 6th and 7th, Bulldogs got a run each of those innings. Ole Miss had 2 errors. So what happened? Overall, Brady Bramlett, he gave up a couple runs in the middle of the game there, but unfortunately, he didn't have a lot of run support there.
Yeah, Bramlett pitched well, but just wasn't good enough. It was hard. Dakota Hudson for State's a projected first-round pick, and he went, a complete game. And it's kind of like that Saturday game against Louisville where Brendan McKay just kind of dominated. When you have a pitcher with that kind of talent, just on his game, it was tough all night. And they had a chance to have a big first inning in that first game, and they kind of missed an opportunity just getting a 1 run there. And he was pretty much lights out after that. So I guess on myself, I got to tip your cap to him because Bramlett kept him in the game, but he was just too good.
And in game 2, it seems like MSU really dominated this one, winning it 6-2. And, Ole Miss, got, I guess they were better at the plate in this game, and they tried to rally in the eighth, but ultimately MSU just got a lot of hits with 12.
Yeah, it's the problem with Ole Miss. The last couple of the problems for Ole Miss the last 2 weeks has been the starting pitching. They hadn't really had a guy that can get them past the fifth inning consistently, other than Bramlett, and he even struggled last week against South Carolina. And it's hard to win a game when you only get an inning and a third from your starter. Just Chad Smith didn't have it, and they jumped on him early. But that's one of the things about Mississippi State is they kind of sneak up on people because their RPI is not very good because they dropped a couple of midweek games that they probably shouldn't have. But that 1-2 punch between Dakota Hudson and Sexton on Friday and Saturdays is one of the best in the country. You're going to have a tough time winning either of the first two games against them. And that's what makes them so good. And I think that's why they've hit their stride in conference play, just because, a couple of those midweek losses hurt them. But, when you get those two guys on the mound, they're going to have a chance to win pretty much every series they're in.
In Game 3, Ole Miss rallied back. Henry Lil Artigue's been one of my favorite guys this year. Brian Scott went 3 for 5, 2 runs, career high 3 RBIs, and was 1 triple short of the cycle. Wyatt Short pitched 4 innings and got the relief victory. So it's good Ole Miss bounced back because they were on I guess they had lost before Sunday's game. 5 straight SEC games. So what did you see in Sunday's game?
It was big for them, I guess, for their psyche, if nothing else, just getting that win. You can't get swept back-to-back weekends, especially if one of them came at home. And the offense finally came to life. You mentioned Artigue. The offense has been off and on since conference play started, but he's kind of been one of the more consistent guys. He's been a bright spot in a lineup that's been kind of underwhelming so far in conference play. And they tried to move him up in the lineup. They hit him second on this Game 2 of last week, and he did well, but Bianco didn't like the way they pitched to him in the 2 holes, so they moved him back down in the order, which I know was an unpopular move with a lot of fans. But he's been really consistent and has really kind of kept the offense afloat when it's been, because it's been pretty bad overall the past couple of weeks. And just, it was good for them to just get one and maybe get back on track. The offense as a whole finally came to life on Sunday, and maybe it's just kind of the win they needed, just to kind of get back on track and right the ship a little bit.
So we see with the poll that just came out, the D1 baseball poll, Ole Miss, they fall to 18. I believe they were as high as 6 earlier in the season. So let's kind of talk about what's gone wrong in these last 2 weekends. The offense, they have not shown up a couple of games, but then the pitching has been mediocre at times too. Brian Scott, we talked with you earlier, I guess was it back in late February, early March, and you were really high on this team that they could possibly host a regional and be a real contender for the College World Series. Now certainly they still can, but a lot of issues need to be fixed. And on paper, I think this team is more talented than last year's team, but just what are some of your biggest problems that you're seeing with this team?
They're just, I guess overall you just kind of call it a funk the last 2 weekends, but I'm not as much concerned about the offense because I believe that'll get itself done. I think Errol's hitting under 100 in conference play, which, he'll eventually get it going, and there'll be some other guys that get the bats going a lot of. The biggest concern to me is the pitching. You're not going to win hardly any SEC series if you can't get your starter to get past or get through the 5th inning. If you have a starter, the strength of this team has been the bullpen so far, but if you're taxing it that heavily all the time and, go into your middle release guys in the 3rd and sometimes the 2nd inning, 3rd, 4th inning, something like that, those guys are having to pitch the last 5 innings, last 6 innings of games twice in a weekend. That's a lot of mileage for them. And so, and just in general, you got to have a starter get you at least 1 or 2 quality starts throughout the weekend. So that's what's the most alarming to me, just because that's not something, that can change really quickly. The offense comes and goes. Teams hit highs and lows throughout, a long 65-game season. But if the pitching doesn't get better, they're going to be in trouble. But they can turn it around. I think the team in 2006 hosted a super regional, and they started 1-5 in conference play. So they can turn around, but they've really got to get something figured out on the mound. I don't know if that's a lot of people want Short pulled out of the bullpen and into the starting role, whether it be on Friday nights or Sundays or just wherever. But that's kind of complicated because that shakes a lot. I mean, he is kind of a linchpin in that bullpen, and moving him kind of makes what you do in the last 2 innings of games a little bit tricky, just because he's been probably the most dominant closer in the SEC. And Will Stokes could be an option, I guess, and maybe go back to Pagnozzi a little bit, but they've got to get something figured out on the mound if they're going to have it. If they want to compete the rest of the year.
Yeah, you said it correctly. The pitching has been a huge problem for the Rebels, but we know Tate Blackman, J.B. Woodman, Colby Bortles, they're going to get it done offensively. But some prizes this year: Henry Lartigue, replacing Austin Knight, and then Michael Fitzsimmons, the freshman, really playing well. I mean, a lot of our listeners don't know a lot about those two guys, but can you talk about their impact that they've had on the team this season?
Yeah, they've been huge. And I think you could throw Ryan Olenek in there, too, as another freshman that came to school as a shortstop. But his bats kept him in the lineup, and Bianco's kind of put him into that outfield. It's kind of been a game of musical chairs between him, Deshaun, and Cloyd. And just those three guys have really made a big impact because, if you take them out of the offense, it's really been – the team as a whole has been kind of underwhelming this year. It's like they weren't counted on to be the most consistent, but I think you could definitely say Lartigue's been the most consistent hitter, maybe along with Woodman this year. And then – Olenek and Fitzsimmons, like you said, Fitzsimmons, especially the last couple of weeks, has come on really strong and just provided a boost offensively for a team that really needs it. And, if those guys can keep hitting well, and then kind of some of the veteran guys, like you said, Bortles, Woodman, Blackman, can kind of pick it up, then I think the offense will be all right, which I think will happen. And like I said, I think they'll be good offensively throughout the rest of the year. And that's another thing. They faced 2 really tough teams the past 2 weeks. I mean, South Carolina had won 13 in a row. And both those teams have 2 of the best pitching staffs, if not the 2 best pitching staffs in the conference. So I think that was part of it. And, they come back home and, I think like 4 of their next 6 SEC series are at home or something like that, or 4 or 5. And so, I mean, the schedule was not friendly to them to open the year in SEC play, and I think they'll get it going. But, yeah, if those young guys can keep hitting and, some of the veteran guys kind of get it together, they'll be good offensively. It's just solidifying or addressing the issues on the mound, I guess, would be the most important thing.
More baseball with Brian Scott Rippee coming up after the break on Hotty Toddy Hotline. We'll be right back. Welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. I'm Browning Stubbs on the phone with Brian Scott Rippee of the Daily Mississippian. All right, well, our listeners, you guys not only love Ole Miss baseball, but you guys love the MLB. And this week is the opening week for Major League Baseball, and there's a lot of Ole Miss players are in the MLB. Brian Scott, from Lance Lynn, Chris Coughlin. There's a lot of guys. And I guess going into this season, out of all the Rebels and the pros, who would you say is, I guess, in the best, who's the best player and in the best position to succeed?
That's tough. There's, because like you said, there's a couple of different guys. I would say Coughlin, because he was on the Cubs, and then, he got traded to Oakland, and he was going to kind of platoon. And he was a, National League Rookie of the Year when he first came in and got called up, and he was on a good team and going to platoon on a good team. But I think in Oakland he'll get a chance to play every day, which was, he kind of had some at-bats cut short and kind of was platooning a little bit last year in the outfield. So I think with him getting a shot every day, I think he could have a lot. I think he'd have a big season that, might come as a surprise to some people, because the last 3 years for him have been a little bit quiet. But if you go to a small market team, and he gets the left field job or the right field job, wherever they want to put him in the corner outfield, if they tell him, that's yours, you're going to play 150 games a year, then, that changes the player's mindset. And, he's talented enough to do it. So I think he could have a big year out in Oakland this year.
And a lot of the local teams, such as the St. Louis Cardinals, seem to always be contenders, and then a team like the Atlanta Braves, who will probably be having another rebuilding season. What insight can you give our listeners on what to expect from the Cardinals and Braves this season?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the Braves. That they're just kind of in the middle of a rebuild. They had a new general manager, and he kind of moved his people in and out of the front office, and just they're in the middle of what the Cubs were a couple of years ago. They're just kind of in an all-out rebuild. They got that new ballpark coming in 2017. I think they're going to try to compete, I guess, a little bit more next year and just kind of get the ball rolling towards 2017 as their trajectory back up. But they're just kind of cleaning house right now. It might be a long year, but better days are coming for that organization. And then, I guess, as far as St. Louis, it's kind of interesting to watch the dynamic in the Central this offseason because the Cubs signed John Lackey and Jason Hayward just kind of out from under the Cardinals' nose. Like Hayward took less money to come play in Chicago, so it's kind of the Cardinals have dominated that division for the most part for the past 8 to 10 years, and maybe a little bit longer than that. And it might be changing a little bit, but St. Louis, they've found a way to win games every single year, and they're not going anywhere. And that division is going to be really intriguing with St. Louis and the Cubs, trying to get built for a World Series run, and then you still have Pittsburgh and Cincinnati that have enough talent on their rosters to compete. So that'll be a really fun division to watch this year.
So let's break it down division by division. So let's start in the American League East. A lot of really strong teams there. Toronto, Boston signed David Price in the offseason. Of course, the Yankees have Tanaka back. So who are you taking to win that division?
Yeah, that one might be the most wide open because every year every couple of years or so you'll have Baltimore and Tampa Bay sneak up on you too. I like Boston just with the addition of David Price, and I know they got the issue with Sandoval at third base, but I would say Toronto and Boston would be my two favorites. I think Toronto ends up winning the division, but I think Boston stays in it a lot longer than people might anticipate.
The American League Central, of course, the World Series champion, Kansas City Royals. They are probably the favorites to win it, but you got a young team like the Minnesota Twins who might make some noise as well. Who are you taking to win that division?
Yeah, I think it'd be hard to go against the Royals. I mean, the starting pitching essentially stayed the same, and they have the best bullpen in the entire major leagues, and it's just, they're not going anywhere. They've got a lot of young talent on their team, and they're going to be good for a couple of years to come, so I think it'd be hard to go against them. But like you said, Minnesota almost was threatening a wild card spot last year, and they could have some success in that division. I don't think any particular team is really ready to compete with Kansas City in that division, but Detroit could venture out for a wild card spot, and I think Minnesota could too, but I think that one is definitely Kansas City's to lose.
American League West, a lot of talented teams. The Astros, they made it to the Championship League Series last year, but I think we're going to see an MVP season from Mike Trout. That's just my opinion. So I don't know if we're on the same page, but do you think this is the year that the Angels finally can possibly make a World Series run?
Yeah, I definitely think it could be, and that could be a division kind of like the NL Central that you can potentially get 3 teams in there in the playoffs if you throw Texas in there too, because those are 3 of the more talented teams in the American League. If you add, Houston and then the Angels, I think Houston wins the division just because of a lot of their young pitching, and they're just gaining more experience year by year. Last year they kind of came onto the scene, and this year they're all a little bit more experienced. They didn't really lose anybody. So I think Houston wins the division, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Los Angeles or Texas gave them a run for their money and won it as well. And I think at least one of the other 2 teams makes a wild card, if not those.
Now let's get to the NL. I think this division might go like last year's, where it's going to be possibly the Mets, and then probably Washington will be right there with them to the very end. Of course, Miami could make a run with their new coaching changes with Don Mattingly and Barry Bonds there. So who do you have taking the NL East?
I like Washington this year to take it. Yeah, last year I thought was kind of a disappointing year for them overall. But yeah, I think it'll be them and the Mets neck and neck. And I kind of like Washington to take the division this year. I think the Mets definitely make the playoffs, but for some reason I'm just kind of high on the Nationals this year. But the Mets aren't going anywhere with that ridiculous amount of young pitching they have, and they've contemplated with going with a 6-man rotation. And if you have that kind of depth, that's pretty impressive. So, but I like Washington to win the division, but it'll be a close race between them and New York through and through. That'll be one that comes down to the last couple of days in September.
And then probably your favorite division, the NL Central. Chicago Cubs favored to win the World Series. We'll see what happens. They haven't won since 1908, but of course the Cardinals and the Pirates. I believe the standings last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Cardinals, Cubs, and Pirates all had the top 3 records in baseball. But it was unfortunate that 2 of them had to play each other in the wild card there. But tell me who you think is going to take home the NL Central.
Yeah, you're right. Those were the 3 best records. I mean, those were probably the 3 best teams in the National League, and it was just tough. Yeah, all 3 of them having to play in the same division. The Cubs won 97 games with the road team in the wild card game, which is just kind of crazy. But with the additions they made this all season with Hayward and Lackey, I definitely think they're the most talented team in the division. But the difference is the expectations this year. Last year was kind of a fun ride for them, and just because they weren't expected to compete this year. But your mindset kind of changes when you're kind of expected to win your division and make a run in the postseason, and sometimes that can be a good thing, and sometimes it can be a bad thing. So I think the Cubs are probably the most talented, but Pittsburgh and St. Louis have been there, especially St. Louis have been there competing longer and have contended for longer and have a lot more experience in that. So, I mean, it's going to be tough. I think that division is wide open because St. Louis is there every year and Pittsburgh's come on the last 5 years, and then now you have the Cubs who loaded up and appear to be trying to make a World Series run. So I'm going to say the Cubs win it, but that is definitely the least confident prediction I will have made for sure because I think that division is definitely wide open with any of those 3 teams could win it.
Lastly, the NL West, I'm pretty sure every time the Giants are playing in an even year, they win the World Series. Well, this is an even year, so but also you got the Dodgers who will be there to the very end as well. So who you got taking the NL West?
It's an even year, and I think it's hard to go against San Francisco. But yeah, you're right. The Dodgers will be there till the end, and San Diego made that big splash in free agency at the beginning of last year. And it really just never kind of worked out. But, I mean, there's still enough talent left on that roster from, what they did in the 14-15 off season, to where they could, surprise some people in the division. But I think the 2, primary contenders would be L.A. and San Francisco, and I think San Francisco wins it this year.
All right, to wrap up Hotty Toddy Hotline, tell me who you got taking home the World Series crown.
I'm going to go with the Mets. I think that pitching, whether they win the division. I
was going to say, you don't have it winning the division.
I know. I for some reason, just when you get into the postseason, and they're going to have an advantage over pretty much every team they face with that amount of pitching and that kind of depth. And when some teams are trying to you get Game 5, Game 6 of a series, and they're trying to throw their starters on short rest. Then they have the option to go 5 and 6 deep with who they throw. I mean, that's an advantage they aren't going to have. And outside the Cubs and the Nationals, I don't think there's a team that's really as good as they are. And through and through, I think that kind of like that Cubs Mets rivalry will be kind of that won't be the first time we'll see them in the NLCS. I think that'll be something for a long. You'll see for a couple of years to come. So I like the Mets coming out of the wild card and then taking the World Series.
All right. Well, Brian Scott Rippee, thank you for joining the show this week. You gave great insight on the Ole Miss baseball team and also had some great picks for this year's MLB. And we'll talk to you soon, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
It's Brian Scott Rippee of the Daily Mississippian. All right, well, we are going to talk the injury to a big Ole Miss football player when Hotty Toddy Hotline returns.
Hey, Rebels, your truck is here. Allen Samuels Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Oxford presents the all-new Ram Rebel. It's Ram, the Rebel way. Send an unmistakable signal. Rebel 24/7. Ram Rebel from your friend in the car business. Allen Samuels Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Oxford.
Come by, let's be friends.
Welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. We want to thank Brian Scott Rippee of the Daily Mississippian. Follow him on Twitter at RIPPEE_2. All right, here's the big news of the week. I wouldn't panic, but here we go. So, Ole Miss quarterback Chad Kelly underwent surgery to repair a sports hernia last week, and he will miss the remainder of spring workouts. The surgery isn't expected to keep him out for an extended I'm just going to redo this segment. Welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. I want to thank Brian Scott Rippee of the Daily Mississippian for joining the show. Follow him on Twitter at RIPPEE_2. So here's the big news of the week. Not Ole Miss baseball, not that the MLB is starting, but Ole Miss quarterback Chad Kelly underwent surgery to repair a sports hernia last week and will miss the remainder of spring workouts. Dun, dun, dun. Quarterback's hurt. That's the top story in Oxford because this team is certainly going to rely on him 100%, considering the defense will have a lot of changes for next year. But the surgery isn't expected to keep him out for an extended period of time or impact his status for the season opener on September 5th against Florida State. However, it does leave the Rebels with just 2 scholarship quarterbacks for the rest of the spring, and the Rebels will have a scrimmage on Saturday. Redshirt freshman Jason Pellerin and true freshman Shea Patterson have been splitting the backup quarterback snaps during spring practice, but now we'll see those guys kind of get more reps. The Rebels also have their 4th quarterback, redshirt senior Drew Davis, who is a walk-on. Kelly was thinking about going to the NFL, but decided to come back because he wanted a chance to possibly win the SEC and win a championship. But the surgery was successful. That's what we do know, and so don't expect to see a lot of Chad Kelly for the rest of the spring. Obviously, he's going to rest. We did see that last year. We saw a lot of guys sit out during the spring just because, you probably just don't want to get hurt going into the fall, especially with a huge game against Florida State where you're going to have your top guys playing in that game. But I think it's not good that he's injured, obviously, but it does give you some more flexibility at quarterback because you get to see more of what Shea Patterson and possibly Pellerin can bring to the table. It would be good to see Shea Patterson, really try to develop a package of plays where he can give Chad Kelly some time off during the regular season. Obviously, we know that Chad is going to be the starter and take, 90-95% of the snaps. But, Eli Manning's freshman year, he, got, a few snaps. And, in that West Virginia bowl game, he played exceptional in that game. But overall, this isn't a bad thing because you get to develop your other quarterbacks, which I think will be pretty good in the long run. Ole Miss did not have good backup quarterback play the last couple years with Devontae Kincaid and Ryan Buchanan, but now, when we look at Eli Manning's first year, played 6 games, threw 53 passes, 337 yards, 3 touchdowns. If we can see Shea and see, hey, he can play the day one SEC level, then we're going to get to see what the future of Ole Miss football looks like. And, of course, Jason Pellerin will have a great chance to play as well. But, let's see what Chad Kelly, here's a quote that he said about all this. I definitely feel more confident from the first game to the last game. I feel like I can see the whole field. I feel like I can go through my first to fifth progression just like that. That's just getting used to the offense, understanding what coach is going to call in certain situations, and getting familiar with the players and how they run certain routes and how they break with certain things. With more and more reps, I think I'll keep getting better. So I'll have to sit out those reps during the spring, but at least he can, fully recover. I mean, this is a very serious injury that we are talking about because you don't want to hurt your hernia even more. So because the groin is a very, very sensitive part of the body that's painful, involves soft tissue, and we don't know exactly how the injury happened, but it most often occurs during sports that require sudden changes of direction or intense twisting movements. Well, that certainly is football. So this is unfortunate that it happened, but again, I think Ole Miss is confident in their backup quarterbacks that they will be able to survive this spring without him. And I think once July comes, SEC Media Days, we'll have more of an update on where Chad is as far as his body. But, Ole Miss expects him to be available on Labor Day for the game against Florida State. So, again, this is, we saw Bo Wallace in college had injuries, but this so it happens to your quarterback. But, Bo never missed a start, so – and I don't think Chad will either. But, yeah, so let's take a look at what's going to happen with Ole Miss spring football, because they are about to wrap up with the spring, as coming up this week, and Ole Miss will have a practice on Tuesday, and we will find out just I guess we'll have an update on where Chad is then as well. And then Saturday is the Chucky Mullins Award Ceremony, and then we're going to find out who will wear the number 38. And if you guys want to tweet at us at Hotty Toddy Hotline or post on our Facebook page at Hotty Toddy Hotline, we'll be happy to converse with you about who you think will wear the number 38. And certainly there's several great candidates. Last year my prediction was wrong, because I said that C.J. Johnson would wear the number 38, but it ended up being Mike Hilton, which is a fine. He was a fine pick, and he really represented the number 38 well. This season, there's a lot of people who could wear the number, but I'm gonna go Tony Connor. I think Tony Connor really represents the defense really well, and he's just a high character guy, and I think as a senior he has deserved to wear the honor. Also, I think Fadal Brown could be a potential player to wear the jersey as well. All right, well, that wraps up our football discussion on this week's Hotty Toddy Hotline. Coming up, we're going to get into more Ole Miss sports. There's certainly a lot that we need to discuss here on Hotty Toddy Hotline, so keep the radio on, keep your YouTube on, and we will be right back. Welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. I'm your host, Brian Stubbs. We are broadcasting this week's show from the Town Place Suites in Oxford. And now let's switch gears. We are going to talk about what's coming up this week in other Ole Miss sports. We need to talk about the Ole Miss women's golf team. They participated in the Rebel Intercollegiate over the weekend, and the Rebels did pretty well. They finished second in the Intercollegiate, shot really good scores, led by senior Allison Hovatter. And in the regular season finale in the tournament, Hovatter was sensational. She led the way for the red and blue, firing a 4-under par 68 and finishing in a tie for 6. And Coach Hink said it was good seeing Allie, being a senior, shooting a 68. Same thing with Abby Doon, who shot a 71. It was huge to have that leadership from them to get the team going. And with women's golf, wrapping up the Rebel Intercollegiate, the Ole Miss men's tennis team played over the weekend as well. They finally got a win. The Rebels were coming off losing 4 straight games, but they did beat rival Mississippi State, defeating the Bulldogs 4-3 on Friday, but then unfortunately lost to Alabama 4-3 on Sunday. Ole Miss softball, they were in action over the weekend. They were also in Starkville taking on Mississippi State. Rebels lost a heartbreaker 4-3, but then, they won 4-3, but then lost 1-0 in extra innings. In the game they lost went 8 innings, but Ole Miss, they got a big weekend series ahead against the Florida Gators coming up this weekend, who are number 1 in the country. So that series is in Oxford, and you don't want to miss that one because we're going to see Ole Miss. Hopefully that they can get one against Florida because they're 3-5 in conference play. So you want to float around 500 if you're going to be a team that makes the NCAA tournament. So let's hopefully cheer on Ole Miss softball and see if they can keep the good work going under head coach Mike Smith, who's doing really well in his second year at the helm. Haven't talked a lot about Ole Miss soccer this semester just because the season ended back in November as they were in the NCAA tournament. But Ole Miss is playing some spring games, and here's their schedule for the rest of the spring. April the 13th, they'll play a home game against Tennessee Martin, and then April 23rd, they will play a road game against LSU. So a lot of rebuilding for this Ole Miss soccer team, but if you do want to see how they look in the spring, again, you can attend those 2 games. Also going on is the Ole Miss women's tennis team. We talked about the men's tennis team earlier. Now the women Rebel Netters, they are going to have a game coming up on Friday at Mississippi State, 3 p.m., and then they will take on Arkansas State on April 11th. So far, the Rebels, they're really struggling right now. They've lost 7 out of their last 8 matches on the season. They're 9-8 and 2-6 in the SEC. And then coming up, we got Ole Miss track and field. They're doing really well this season. They're going to have a meet coming up on April the 8th. It's in the Tiger Track Classic. They will be in Auburn, Alabama on April the 8th, April the 9th. And then the season for them doesn't end until June, which will be in the NCAA championships. But Ole Miss has got to continue to play well in conference play if they want to end up making that. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up what happened over the weekend in the other Ole Miss sports. But again, we've got a big week coming up in Oxford. We're going to talk about what's coming up with this weekend. Ole Miss baseball, they are playing Southern Miss in the annual game in Pearl, Mississippi. So we'll talk about that. And then also we're going to tell you about their big matchup coming up against the Arkansas Razorbacks this Friday at Swayze Field. So keep it here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. We'll be right back.
Because you want more flavor, at Nuke's we marinate and grill to perfection. Because you want the latest culinary tastes and trends, we never rest. At Nuke's, great food drives us. So we are meticulous in our preparation, obsessed with the quality of our ingredients, and uncompromising about serving you our very best. We believe that sharing a memorable meal is one of life's ultimate pleasures. Join us at Nuke's Eatery.
Welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. I'm your host, Browning Stubbs. And let's take a moment to thank the people who make this show happen, and that is Charter Road Hospitality. We're broadcasting this week's show from the Town Place Suites in Oxford. And April is a big month for a lot of things going on in Oxford with the Double Decker Festival that's coming up in just a couple of weekends. And if you're going to be here, you need to book your hotel reservations as soon as possible. You can call the Town Place Suites at 662-238-3522 at 105 Ed Perry Boulevard. And then Hampton Inn of Oxford, right across the street from the Town Place Suites. You can call them 662-334-5535 at 103 Ed Perry Boulevard. And it's not just over by the Conference Center. We also have properties over in Jackson Avenue. 112 Heritage Drive is the Holiday Inn Express. Call them 662-236-2500. And at 110 Heritage Drive is the Hampton Inn of Oxford, 662-513-0340. Of course, May, graduation. Like I said, Double Decker, got some games at Swayze Field, so don't miss your chance to stay in a comfortable hotel, as Town Place Suites offers free continental breakfast, coffee 24/7. As you see, I got my cup right here, and it's just a great place for you to stay. All right, Ole Miss baseball. This weekend, they've got to get back on track, taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks. And the first game's at 6:30, second game is at 7, and then the third game is at noon. But before Arkansas, they play Southern Miss on Tuesday in the game in Pearl, Mississippi. And Ole Miss, of course, another midweek game. They've got to fix their pitching rotation. We talked with Brian Scott Rippee about that, and he thinks that they're in trouble if they can't fix it very soon, because earlier in the season when Ole Miss started, 22, the pitching was great, but that was kind of, really early before the conference play started. So Ole Miss is going to have to figure out who's going to start on Tuesday. They haven't announced yet who's going to start that game. But Ole Miss, they're really getting good contribution from their freshmen this season, not only at the plate but also on the mound as well. So we're going to find out who is going to start. We'll probably find that out Tuesday morning, but the game on Tuesday is played at Trustmark Park in Pearl. The game starts at 6:30. And just some other notes, Henry Lartigue leads the team in hitting, batting .357, and Colby Bortles is tied for first in the SEC with 11 doubles, and J.B. Woodman is tied for second with 5 sacrifice flies. So a lot of good things going on for Ole Miss baseball as we advance towards the middle of conference play. Ole Miss baseball, like I said, we're getting towards the middle of conference play, but they're falling in the polls. We said it earlier in the show. They got as high as 6 in the D1Baseball.com poll. Now they are at 18. So the team really is going to have to stay in that top 25 if their hopes and aspirations are to host a regional. And the team is 2-0 in neutral site games, so the game against Southern Miss indeed is a neutral site game, so they'll have to try to be aware of that and hopefully win that one to go 3-0. The game last week that was supposed to be played against Memphis was postponed due to weather, played at AutoZone Park, but that game is going to be replayed between the Ole Miss and the Tigers, but it's been pushed to April 19th, and the first pitch there is going to be at 6:30 at AutoZone Park, and it's going to be broadcast on the Ole Miss Sports Radio Network. Well, all right. Well, we talked on the show about Ole Miss baseball. We recapped their weekend against MSU. We talked some MLB. We talked Chad Kelly and his injury, and we talked a little bit about Ole Miss spring football, and that wraps up our show on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Make sure you go click that like button on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Hotty Toddy Hotline. We thank you, Charter Road Hospitality. And for our executive producer, John Rowe, you've been listening to Hotty Toddy Hotline, a production of CRM Sports on the Colonel Rev Radio Network. We'll see you guys next week.